ever wondered why we mulch? Why do we add this extra process to our yards and gardens? Well, stay tuned and I'll explain it. Welcome to Down the Garden Path, and thank you for joining me here today. And today I wanted to chat with you about mulch. And why do we do this extra task that we seem to always have to think about or plan on or actually do? I want to start by saying that mulch is not a design feature. We don't really put mulch down because it looks good. That might be a byproduct of that if you use the right material. But I do want to start out saying that no one should be commenting on your mulch and how good it looks. They should be commenting on your garden and your flowers and your plants. So mulch is not a design feature. Mulch's purpose is to help with weed control, one. So weed control, if there's a nice, good amount of mulch on your bed, then weeds may still come because they really are blown in from above. They're not really necessarily coming up from below. But they are much easier to get out when you're weeding through mulch instead of directly in the soil. Mulch also helps keep our soil cool in the heat of the summer, which helps protect our plants. Keeps their roots cool, keeps them growing, keeps them happy. And when it rains or when you water, it also keeps, in addition to keeping the roots cool and the soil cool, it's also helping the soil retain moisture. So that watering and that rainfall that might happen will last a lot longer with a nice, good coating of mulch. The other thing is that mulch, its whole purpose is to break down. It is to decompose and break down and add nutrients and insect activity that it's going to help it break down to your soil and to your gardens. So yes, that means we have to top it up every once in a while, but it's doing its job by breaking down and adding those nutrients into our soil. So there's less having to add other things to our soil. So the key thing here is why it is so important to make sure you're adding a quality mulch to your soil, to your gardens. And so that's something to really think about and consider when it comes to some of the dyed. So I want to start off first talking about the dyed mulches that come in big bags. First of all, we don't know how long it's been in that bag, and we don't know how much mold and whatever is going on in there also. But one of the characteristics about those dyed mulches is that wood that is so receptive to all those dyes, whether you go with red, black, or brown, tends to be waste from think of the fence board, waste from construction material. So pallets, broken down, shredded fence boards, that type of thing. So that really isn't a lot of nutrition in there. Even if they're dyed, they will fade, they will gray, they will, turn yellowish if you're going with more of the red mulch, which not my favorite. So it's something to think about when you are buying those dyed mulches. I say it's better to not do any mulch then if that's all that's in your budget or that's all you want to use. It is much more worth the time and worth the effort to invest. And I'm not talking like hundreds of dollars more. I'm just, it's a little bit more to get a more natural composted pine mulch or a natural shredded bark, something that is natural, that doesn't have any color added to it or anything else added to it, but will slowly, and it's usually a finer material. The other disadvantage of those chunks and the dyed mulches or any of the other mulches that are big chunks of mulch, sometimes people think that's a better thing because they're bigger pieces and they're not going to decompose and disappear as quickly, although that's really what we want. But the problem with those big chunky type of mulches is they do blow around. They don't stay. And so you're picking them out of your lawn, the wind is blowing them onto the driveway, that type of thing. So the nice thing about having something shredded is that it stays where it is. It's much easier to distribute, and it's much easier to have an even layer of mulch added to your garden. I do want to say that in addition to adding mulch to our gardens, another area that is very beneficial is to add mulch in a ring around the base of your trees. Now, regardless of whether your trees are very young or they're very mature, all trees can benefit from this type of mulch ring around their base. I focus on the term ring and not volcano. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term mulch volcano. So we do not need the mulch to be, heaped up onto the base of the trunk. Again, whether it's a small trunk or whether it's a larger trunk, we do not need, a huge amount that's a hill around the base of your tree. The simplest way to explain it is something called a 3-3-3 method. So we want the mulch to be about 3 inches thick. We want it to come out about 3 feet from the trunk. And we also want there to be a gap between the trunk and the mulch. So again, we don't want the mulch climbing up the trunk. We want there to be a gap around the trunk. So mulch doesn't necessarily need to touch the trunk. We need about a 3-inch gap around the trunk. So there's your 3-3-3. So 3 inches deep, 3 feet wide with a 3-inch gap touching the trunk. So you want a gap between the mulch and the base of the trunk. So why don't we want mulch to be heaped up at the base of the trees? Shockingly, even on mature trees, this happens. The base, if the soil stays there for a long time and it's up, 3, 6, 8 inches. Sometimes I've got somebody in my neighborhood, it's like a foot high, if not more. The tree roots actually start growing into the mulch. Like you're now creating roots above the ground surface. And that does not make for a healthy tree. It does not make for an attractive tree. And it does not make for in the long term for a healthy tree. And it goes to the structure of the tree and just all the things that can happen. It also attracts more insects and more critters into that area. So we're not trying to create a home for anything. We really are just protecting the base of the tree. And it's practical too, because a lot of trees get damaged. And again, you've probably seen this around also from the lawnmower, from the weed whipper, where you've got damages and nicks at the base of your tree. Who's ever done that, So if you don't have to get really close to the trees with your mower, then that's where another reason to have that mulch circle, think of it like a donut around the base of your tree. If you have, if you've got a city tree that maybe somebody in the city for some reason cuts it instead of you, if you have your kids mowing your lawn, I know that was an issue for me. It is a good idea to do that, to have that nice mulch ring around the base of your tree. And again, to follow the 3-3-3 method. So that is my tips as far as mulching goes. There's no right or wrong time to mulch. So if right now, and temperatures are finally warming up and everybody's itching after our long winter to get outside. If you run out of time, in May and you can't get to it, it's okay to do it in June. It's okay to do it in July. There really isn't a good time or a bad time to do it. You'll see that how the soil reacts differently when it's left exposed versus adding mulch on top. And my thing is, if you're leaving it for an extended period of time, then you've got to do a lot of work weeding it before then you add mulch on top of that. So that's something to consider. And I've had questions from people before, whether let's say you're putting in a new garden yourself and you filled the bed with soil. I've had questions where people have asked, should I add the soil and add the mulch and then just make the space for the plants? Not really. I mean, that would make more work. So I think it's easier to add the soil, amend your soil if you've got an existing garden bed, but you're wanting to make a new garden. Maybe you're going to add some more compost or manure, more organic material. Then dig your holes, plant your trees and shrubs and perennials and plants. And then when it's all planted, then you come back with the mulch and you mulch as close to the base of the the perennials and the shrubs and as possible. And obviously, when a tree is in the garden, you can't really do that 3-3-3 method. That's more for me. That's more for trees that are in our lawns and yards as opposed to in the garden. So that's something to consider. So once again, it's not a design feature. We're not going for something that, people are going to be driving by and going, "Ooh, look at your mulch. It looks great." I know some of them, the black mulch can look, when it first goes down, it can look really sharp and really clean looking, but that's not necessarily the purpose. And I assure you that something like a composted pine mulch will go down nice and dark, not necessarily black. It's kind of more of a deeper brown and will look also very attractive. And it won't fade to an ugly gray like the dyed black mulch will. So that's something to consider. And that the dyed stuff that dye comes off, so you'll find, some dye on your brickwork, on your hands if you're planting in it or working in it. So there are many upsides to that dyed mulch. And so something I can think you should really consider is more of a nutritious. I personally prefer composted pine, but there's hemlock. There's other quality things, wood chips or wood mulch that you can purchase, and you can ask your supplier. Just talk to them. You may be better off going to more of a landscape supply place versus a big box store where whatever they have in the bag is what you get. So I think it's easier to do that. And if let's say you have a really small garden and you don't want to, invest in a delivery of mulch, then you may even want to mulch with a compost. So it's not going to be the same type of coverage as you would get with a wood mulch, but it's also going to slowly break down. It's also going to inhibit some, just because of how active it is, and may inhibit some weeds, and it'll certainly keep the soil cooler. So it's not exactly the same thing, but I appreciate that if you've got a really small yard or a very small garden, you're not wanting to get a big delivery of mulch, to your home. So that's something, and at least you're adding something that is going to really can improve the soil in your garden. So I hope everybody understands and finds that interesting. I do want to also mention that if you are one of those people, and I'm kind of one of those people too. Well, I want to mention some alternatives, to mulch. So one is our leaves in the fall. You can mulch those leaves. There's a gadget. I know my husband has this Sunjoy gadget where he puts the leaves in. It's like a ring with almost like a weed whipper. It's a big ring that sits on top of we put it on a garbage can, like a plastic garbage can, and then he puts the mulch in the hole, and as it's going in, it's whipping those leaves and making it more of a fine. It's kind of like an upside down blender, really. You can use the big Rubbermaid garbage bins and put the mulch in and use your weed whipper. Same thing like an immersion blender if you're cooking, you can do that, and you can weed up those. And in the fall, you can do a nice coating of those shredded leaves, and that will start to break down, and that will be a mulch. If you are in a neighborhood or a yard with mature trees like I am. Not everybody has that. I totally get that. I've seen people take other people's drive around and take other people's leaf bags, so that's always an option if you really want to create your own mulch. That is an option to do that, to use the leaf debris in the fall. You can rake it into a pile, and in the corner, if you've got a bigger yard or a corner, that you can do that with it and let it decompose over the winter. And then in the spring, it may have broken down more that you can then apply it and still follow the 3-3-3 method. Or you can supplement that decomposition with a weed whipper or a gadget like I'll post that Sunjoy leaf mulcher in the show notes so you can take a look at it. Everybody stops my husband and is like, "What are you doing? What is that? What's happening?" So that is a cool little gadget. The other thing you can do, and again, you can do this whether you have a small garden or a large garden, you just do it in pieces or do it gradually if the budget allows, is switching to more of a green mulch. So who says we have to bring something in? that going to something like going to exactly that, a ground cover. So there are lots of, we usually plant ground covers in other areas of our yard just for the sake of it being a ground cover. But I think if we change a bit and start thinking about ground covers as a green mulch, then that also adds a lot of benefit to our garden and to our garden maintenance. If it's a sunny yard, you've got a lot of choices of sedums, creeping thymes. There's a lot of perennial ground covers that really do make a dense carpet. My woolly thyme makes such a dense carpet. The weeds are not getting through. It's blending with some of my evergreen, like some of my evergreen creepers. They've just woven together. So that really helps in that area of my garden close to the road where it's very a challenging space. And even though sometimes weeds, not really weeds, usually it's like another plant, like my purple coneflower comes into that. You can easily see that something that shouldn't be there is there and take it out. So sedums, Angelita sedum, lots of different sedums choices that will. Sometimes they take a little bit longer. One sedum doesn't, I'm talking about the carpet sedums too, and not necessarily the rounded autumn joy type sedums, but you've got the carpet sedums that can make a nice dense carpet underneath and act as a mulch. Sweet woodruff in the shade, epimedium. For me, that one's been, I think I see the benefits of it. But for me, under my Crimson King maples, it's been slow. The ginger, though, has been a little bit faster. So wild ginger has been, and that's a native one also, it came up early. It greened up very early, actually. So I was really impressed by that. And so I'm trying a few different things under those Crimson Kings, very shady, very kind of east side of the yard fence, very shady and very tough growing conditions underneath a maple tree. 2 maple trees, actually. So I'm experimenting with a few different green mulches there. So yeah. So, just wanted to end on that note that if you really, really don't like mulch, really, really can't be bothered with replacing it, or you eventually want to wean off of replacing it, then you can start by really thinking about adding ground covers. And those ground covers can go under your shrubs, they can go under your hydrangeas. Ground covers aren't just for those bare spots where there's nothing growing. There's no reason why you can't have a carpet of creeping thyme underneath your flowering shrubs to act as a mulch and act as that same thing, weed suppression, as well as keeping the soil cooler, as well as keeping the moisture retention in the ground, because most ground covers don't particularly need a lot of moisture like some of the other perennials. So they're really good at moderating that. So something to think about. I hope I gave you lots of ideas and explanations as to why we mulch. Once again, thank you for joining me down the garden path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.